Welcome, everyone. I'm Maria Marshall. I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. So welcome to our last webinar before we have a summer break, I guess, from webinars, and we start back up in the fall. We're ending off, I guess, the semester with a wonderful, and I think really relevant seminar, probably for everyone across the country, not just the North Central region. Just a reminder that the webinar will be recorded, and then you'll get a link to that after the recording is edited. So our webinar today is Moving Rural Communities Forward, Future Opportunities for Rural Workforce and Rural Development through Extension. And I'm going to introduce Sheila Martin, who will then introduce her team that is going to be speaking with us today. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you, Maria. So how might cooperative extension educators build capacity for rural communities to work together on workforce solutions? And how might they help create opportunities for rural, low-income, underrepresented workers? How can extension educators be a catalyst for partnerships that are needed to move communities and workers forward? These are the questions that we're exploring in the Forward Project. My name is Sheila Martin. I'm a strategic advisor for the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And I want to start by thanking my partners at Purdue University, Michael Wilcox and Tanya Hall, and my partners from Utah State University, Carrie Urey and McKay Erickson, and my partners at the University of Arkansas, Tabitha Duvall, Hunter Goodman, and Terry James. And I want to thank Kirsten Nieto from Ascendium, not only for funding this project, but also for the important support that she gives us by connecting us to similar projects all across the country. An important part of this work is learning from each other about what works and where it works. And so I want to thank everybody who's here today, because you're participating just by listening and by learning and by sharing your own strategies. So feel free to leave your comments in the chat about resources that you might want to contribute. And let's feel free to continue the conversation afterwards on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you have to say about what we're going to share with you today. Future Opportunities for Rural Workforce and Rural Development is a curriculum developed by Cooperative Extension for Cooperative Extension professionals. It's designed for extension educators interested in helping low-income rural residents succeed in finding rewarding careers, and it's designed for extension educators who want to help communities identify and address workforce development challenges. Why did we develop Forward? I mean, we know that rural students are underserved in post-secondary education. Rural areas have lower levels of educational attainment, and rural high school graduates are less likely to attend college. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them being the higher education deserts that we often find in rural communities. Many of those higher education deserts are also broadband deserts, and that limits the opportunities that rural communities have for remote learning. We also know that rural areas they're underserved by workforce programs. Most workforce dollars are distributed through state and regional workforce boards, and rural communities often get lost in the big demand that more densely populated programs have for training resources. So in many rural areas, cooperative extension is already working to build workforce development capacity. And in so many ways, it's really a natural fit. Extension works with local farms and businesses on a number of financial and technical issues. Why not workforce? And Extension works with families and young people on to advance their physical health, to advance their financial health. And what's more basic to a family's health than being able to work towards a career that can support you and your family? We're certainly not the first to notice that cooperative extension might be great at facilitating career pathways. Projects such as Work Ready, Stronger Economies Together, Extension Works, and Skill Up have leveraged the deep roots of cooperative extension educators and the expertise of extension specialists to help many communities make progress toward their workforce development goals. These successes have encouraged us to build and develop a program that could scale through the Cooperative Extension Network. So we really wanted to build capacity among cooperative extensions so that educators could help their communities, especially where existing programs to build career pathways is limited. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael now to talk about how we built the curriculum.
Sure. And as Sheila mentioned, one of the great things that she and her staff did at the beginning of this was to inventory curricula from all over the United States. And we have a document that I found to be just a treasure trove of information, all of the different extension programs that have worked in workforce development quite successfully across the US. And so from that list, we were able to pinpoint, identify some folks that really fit into kind of the sequential pathway building that we were trying to build in this curriculum. And so some of the people that bubbled up were, well, myself, Tanya, and Sheila, we're the folks on the team. And so we thought that developing key partnerships would be an area that we could really contribute to. And then looking outside of the three of us as the PIs on the grant, along with Maria Marshall, we looked at that list of individuals as well as just the benches of all the different extension programs across the country. And we came up with a really impressive list. And we're very happy that we had the likes of Mark White from the University of Missouri working with us on identifying workforce assets and needs. Joy Moten Thomas from Fort Valley State University working on developing entrepreneurship and leadership skills. Paul Hill, which many of you know from his work at Utah State on remote work, developing remote work skills. Jeff Sherman from Oregon State University working on recruiting and supporting rural learners. And then my good friend Cheryl Burkhart Kreisel from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln working on evaluation and reflection. So really a phased, stepwise process and really bringing some of the best work that was going on across the United States all together under one roof, one collaborative roof, if you will, to put together this curriculum and then pilot test it, as you'll be hearing today.
Thanks. So as Michael mentioned, we're pilot testing the curriculum in three counties, 3 rural counties. And these are the 3 pilot sites in Crawford County, Indiana, where Tanya and Michael are working on it. In Hempstead County, Arkansas, where Terry, Hunter, and Tabitha are working on it. And Sevier County in Utah, where Carrie, Yuri, and McKay are working on piloting the curriculum. So all of these communities are rural, but they have some differences. They're all a little bit different. Crawford County has a population of about 11,000 with no urbanized areas. Hempstead and Sevier are both a little bit larger with about 20,000 population. Hempstead isn't too far from Texarkana, which is a good sized metro area of about 150,000, and Sevier is more remote. So the 3 are starting at very different points, though, with respect to the community's capacity in workforce development and cooperative extension's participation in workforce development. So Crawford County's got some experience working together, and I'll leave Tanya to talk about that a little bit in a moment. Hempstead's done less work together, and in Sevier County, cooperative extension is very new at this work. So, so you'll see as we move through some of the descriptions of the pilots, how some of those differences play out. So I'll turn it over to Tanya then to talk about Crawford County.
All right, thank you very much, Sheila. So just a little background, as Sheila mentioned, Crawford County is a pretty rural community. You have roughly 10,500 residents within this community. You can see the high school education is predominant relative to the amount of bachelor's degrees, and the poverty level is about 15.6%. And so some of the things that were kind of striking to the task force that we brought together was the generational chart in terms of the distribution of the folks that live there in Crawford County. But then also the labor participation rate was something that was of interest especially not only for economic development, but also thinking about it from a standpoint of how engaged are the residents in workforce development. So having that information was very helpful when it came to thinking about how to develop a partnership within Crawford County. And if you don't mind going to the next slide. You know, we as Purdue Extension Community Development Program have had a presence in Crawford County since about 2016. Extension as a whole has had a presence in Crawford County for many years before that. But their taste of actual true community development type work, again, began in 2016. And due to that work, we had a pretty strong understanding of the landscape. And so we knew that they had limited resources, as in they had a lot of different service agencies or groups that were coming into the county from within the region, but there wasn't a lot of actual agencies tethered there within Crawford County. And so that brings a lot of challenges and some distrust. We also recognize the dynamics within the community in terms of how people were working together. And we also recognize that there were some pretty strong bonds within different groups, but there was limited bridging across those different groups. And again, going back to the service agencies, we also recognize that there was a fair amount of rapid churn. And due to Crawford County having a fairly large presence of forest ground, we saw that they have a tremendous amount of small businesses, many of which kind of fly under the radar, meaning that people don't know that they exist. And so there's a kind of a unique opportunity for us as Extension to come in and work with them in workforce development, because we have heard from the Economic Development Director that workforce is a challenging topic. And we can go on to the next slide. So the very first thing that we did when we convened our group, and the group that we included were though not only the Economic Development Office, but also the local labor department. So in this case, it was called Southern Indiana Works. We also ended up reaching out to, well, we intended to reach out to the high school, but they were undergoing some transitions in terms of leadership. And then lastly, we also included the adult education provider. And so that was the initial group. We were small, but we were mighty. And the very first task that we put in front of ourselves is developing a mind map. So I know you can't see all the words on this mind map, but know that what you see here is only half of the mind map. And this is simply outlining what do we have here in Crawford County in relation to workforce development. And so this is looking at, again, the labor department, what's provided in that county, what are the services. This includes looking at the adult education provider, what do they have, looking at extension, what kind of programs do we have here. And going through this exercise was eye-opening in itself, and there was learning across the board for all of the folks around the table and understanding what were the different assets that we had within the county or within the region that could be leveraged here within Crawford County. So I'm really thankful that we started off with this, because that really kicked off the project on a positive step to understand what was the lay of a landscape.
Tanya, it should be noted that we did this virtually. Tanya was a rock star and did this all online on Zoom. And it was amazing watching her not only facilitate, but typing all of this in, asking questions and getting all of the information. And then we went through and had this refined by going back through it and working with the workforce development folks, as well as the local economic development official, to really refine this and make sure that it reflected the realities in Crawford County. And they, I think, have blown this up and have it on a wall now and use it as reference. It's just been a really excellent tool that we've introduced to try to define all of these different pathways and assets.
Yeah, and one other thing, I mean, this is a free tool. I will drop the link in the chat, but it's called MindMeister. And so this is something, it's a tool that is free that you can use. And again, this is only half of it. The other half of the mind map was looking at the strengths and also the challenges that they had related to workforce development. And so To be honest, this took up much more time than I anticipated. I really thought it would be something that we'd touch on really quickly and then move on. But this took up pretty much the entire time that we had that day to focus on a partnership building. But again, it really helped us understand who was missing when it came to looking at the landscape of workforce development. I'm going to turn it back over to Sheila.
Sheila, you're on mute.
Thank you. You'd think that after 2 years, this would be, something that we get used to, but, so as Tanya mentioned, Tanya and Michael were the first ones out of the gate with this project, and they had sort of a head start. Our other pilots in Utah and in Arkansas, everybody faces a different set of opportunities and challenges in rural communities in terms of building partnerships. And, as we know, in rural communities, we have these really strong community connections. And sometimes what that means is it takes a while to build trust and to learn how to work together to collaborate in rural communities. And for some extension educators, this is really a new role for them. And so it might take a little while for community members and people who are working in economic development in that community to understand why extension is there, what their role might be. And so I just wanted to pause for a moment and give Carrie an opportunity to comment on how that has played out in Utah.
Thanks, Sheila. Okay, so when you I hope you can hear me. My computer's doing some weird things.
Thanks, Carrie. We can hear you.
Okay, so in Utah, we were very new in starting this with our community leaders, and both of us that are doing the pilot are also new to the area. We've both been here about a year, and as we started, both of our positions are relatively new also to our county, and so the traditional extension programming was exciting to see. The county was excited to see our roles in our traditional home and community and livestock and agriculture take place. They were less familiar with us being in the economic development role and support. And so as we started, we had that strong community connection. We had a commissioner that was we could work with, and our county administrator, who is also our economic development director. We had their support, but we were all new at economic development support being part of extension. So working together, we have come to learn more about it together and also to support each other in our roles. And it started out slowly, but we are gaining a lot of information, a lot of data, using the data as part of our story, using the connections to our stakeholders as the other part of our story, and gaining that together. But knowing our economic story and having that data will help us in all of our programming. And so our community has learned and started to really respect us with the economic development side of things, because they realize that that is part of our role. And by knowing that and looking at that, we can support our other extension programming as well.
Thanks, Carrie. And I just wanted to check in, Tabitha, did you want to add a little bit about how your partnerships have gotten moving there in Arkansas, in Hempstead County?
Yes, so Terry James, who is the cooperative extension agent there in Hempstead County, she did have some background working in community development there in Hempstead County. And one of the things they had been working on pre-COVID was a program called Thrive. And so it's a strategic plan essentially for the county, which included she worked specifically in the quality of place section of it, but it also included information on workforce development. So they had this very high level overarching plan that kind of went dormant with COVID. And so Forward came in at the perfect time as they're getting the ball rolling again. And so it's really allowed a place for our stakeholders, including the University of Arkansas, Hope Texarkana, to Hope Public Schools, to to different industries there in the area, their economic development. It's a place for them to come together where they're not as siloed in the work that they're doing and the programs that they have, and it's allowed them to dive deeper into the workforce development process and to develop some pipelines together on what they'd like to see happen in the future.
Thanks, Tabitha. So I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to talk about the, how we're using data as a prompt for these conversations.
Thank you so much. I went off video to conserve bandwidth for Carrie, so I apologize for that. I wanted to take a moment to talk a bit about the data piece, and I will say that Mark White was, hopefully he's on this webinar to hear this, but I thought that he was an absolute rock star throughout the process. And when we asked him to put together this piece on data, he basically looked at us and said, "Hold my Diet Coke," and just went and did it. And he came back with it was 30 to 50 pages of curriculum with all the links and how do you find the data and what should your PowerPoint look like and what sort of data should it include and what sort of analysis should you use and should it be a line graph or a bar graph. And I mean, it was absolutely incredible what he's put together. And it's really a soup to nuts toolkit on how to find and analyze workforce development data, and then how to operationalize it at the local level. The challenge, though, is not everyone gets really excited like I do to look at this data, to go find the data. Sheila and myself and Tanya are all trained ag economists, and so this is what we get all hot and bothered about, and we want to do this, but there's others that don't get as excited about doing that. And we found this in the Stronger Economies Together program. Many of you may remember that program. I was, amongst others, was in on the ground floor on that program, and throughout its lifespan, one of the challenges was how do we empower people to find data for themselves? And we wound up providing a lot of the data through that program, and through this program, we're trying to create some self-sufficiency, if you will, some capacity in and around finding the data, analyzing the data, and using the data. And I think we have varying capacity across the United States in the Extension Service, in the land-grant universities. There's some places where they're just chock full of regional economists, ag economists that are willing to help and can find the data, have it on the ready. Maybe they've already analyzed it and can really accelerate progress in our communities through that collaboration. But there's others where they need to fall back on someone, perhaps it's a local entity that's crunching this data, maybe it's a regional entity that's crunching this data, and maybe a non-university entity that's crunching this data. And so this is one particular challenge. I feel like the curriculum is standalone, that if you walk through step by step what Mark has, what he has laid out for you, I think that most people should be able to walk through it, but it's extremely time consuming. And this isn't the only thing that folks are doing. So if you can get a little extra help, I think that would be helpful to you. We were very lucky that we were able to help Arkansas. I think they would agree that the data that Tanya specifically provided to them has really helped them move forward very quickly, and they've wielded it in a lot of different ways, versus our Utah group. Their local entities had already processed quite a bit of data, and so they were offered the opportunity to try to figure out where they might fit in terms of the data acquisition and how do they leverage the data that's already in place to help inform some of the decisions that need to be made as they're trying to elucidate these pathways, if you will.
Michael,
Tanya, did you want to go over these?
Yes, I will. So just a little bit of background. So given our work in Crawford County, we had actually gone through quite a bit of data with them, as in they had a really solid knowledge of the demographic data. They had a really solid knowledge of a lot of the economic data. And so being armed with that information, therefore I came into looking at Mark White's fantastic resource. And I said, you know, I'm going to skip on down to item 2 and 3, which is looking at labor demand and labor supply. And so when I did that, what I did is I actually used a proprietary data source because that's what we have access to here at Purdue. But this data right here that I'm showing you, we looked at industry data, we looked at occupation data. We also looked at some trends in terms of burning glass in terms of job postings. You can also see how often the jobs are being posted. So what's the relative churn? And then lastly, we also looked at some of the skills that were being in demand and some of the top qualifications. And so this is different information that our stakeholders had not really taken the time to look at. They had seen some of the more traditional data, and again, looking at demographics, looking at the number of, what businesses they had in the community, industries, occupations, but this is a slightly different look, and they really appreciated the contrast of supply, labor supply, and then also labor demand. And so this really afforded us a great conversation starter to then start honing in on where do we want to focus in terms of an industry sector. And so again, the data was not a heavy dive, a deep dive into some of this information, but rather the relevant information for the topic at hand related to workforce development. And I'm going to hand it back over to Sheila.
Thanks, Tanya. The next thing that that we would want to do once we have come to agreement with our community about the career pathways that, or the needs that the community has, as well as the interests that that the community members might have as far as career opportunities, the next thing would be to build the career pathways. So we would want to collect all the information about the assets that are available in that community in order to help people understand how to step through these career pathways and the educational resources and training that they would need in order to satisfy the employer requirements. We're working towards that, and at this point, we're not really at a point where anybody has built specific career pathways yet among the pilot projects. Tanya, did you want to comment on the career pathway work that you've done there? And then I'll invite Tabitha and Carrie to make any comments on where they think they are and where they might be before the end of the pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fantastic resource to pass out to the employer. So like I mentioned, when we finished doing the data analysis, we asked, where do we want to start our focus first? And in Crawford County, they recognized that they had a lot of transportation and warehousing, as well as logistics. And so that was where we started. And so therefore we convened in an employer roundtable and started the conversation. From that, I've also had a conversation with the different employers. And one thing that I found really telling when it came to building the career pathways is that some companies are going to already have a very clearly laid out pathways within their own organizations, whereas others may not have any of that articulated. So therefore, it makes it a lot harder for them to share with us, what kind of training do they need, or what are the requirements for that job. And so that has really been kind of an eye-opening experience. And so therefore, that is also going to affect the timeline in terms of how quickly we can construct a community-wide career pathway for a particular industry. And so that is definitely work that's going on as we speak. But that was a great conversation starter for the one employer that did not have any of this set up. And so he was very curious about how do you construct this? And so that is work that I'll be doing alongside with him as he works on this, in particular for the diesel mechanics within the operation, And then also thinking about how to do this with the office staff, because this is a trucking company that we were working with. And so some of it was more obvious in terms of how one may advance, but it's not the same across all industries as to how folks would advance through this industry.
Tabitha, did you have any, I don't know how far exactly you are in thinking about this, but how are those conversations gone about career pathways?
So we're not too far along into the process of specific pathways quite yet. Looking at the data with our stakeholders, and they've recently brought it to the Economic Development Commission. Our data is showing a lot of what very similar to what Crawford County has, but also very, very similar to what was expected for us to see in Hempstead County. There are several manufacturing businesses in the area, so it was not a surprise for us to see processing jobs, and CDL truck drivers was one of our top needs in the area, and so we were not surprised to see that. And so those conversations had kind of already started with UA Hope Texarkana, and the superintendent of schools has been at our meetings, and one of the goals that he set at our last meeting was to really start looking at kind of a diploma plus. So having the opportunity for students to have a certification as they leave, or to have some college classes as they leave the K-12 program, as nursing was one of the other top programs needed.
Carrie, did you want to comment on pathways discussion?
We're pretty new at this as well. So far, we've only done more anecdotal conversations, but our Small Business Development Center, our Labor Department, and our CTE are coming together to look at this. We have looked at medical and we've looked at transportation, truck driving specifically, and how one of our companies locally is starting to look at how they can, we had some new CDL requirements that they're looking at together. Our regional economist is coming to our next meeting, which will be very helpful in looking at ways that we can start on these pathways.
Thanks, Carrie. I want to just spend a few more minutes just walking through the rest of the curriculum pieces. As Michael explained earlier, we have developed a unit on entrepreneurship. And, the rural communities, as we all know, rely heavily on small businesses and entrepreneurs, not only as job creators in their communities, but also many of these folks become the leaders of the community as they're building their businesses. And so entrepreneurship skills are valuable, not just for building a business, but for supporting a small business, and more generally for becoming leaders in the community. We are working to test out that curriculum. I think in Arkansas, they may have an opportunity to connect the workforce piece that they're working on right now with some of the small business pieces that they have in a related program. So Hunter, I don't know if you would want to make a comment about how those pieces are working together.
Sure, thank you, Sheila. And just a special shout out to Terry James, who's the extension agent, as Tabitha mentioned, on the ground, the staff chair in Hempstead County, who's just done a tremendous job of making this happen on the ground. And so, for example, Terry, along with the director there at the UA Hope Texarkana campus, as well as others, have gone to their economic development committee, and they have garnered support, and their chancellor is very engaged in looking at using the entrepreneurial curriculum that Joy is putting together as a resource. So that's been a tremendous help to aid in this conversation on the ground. And at the same time, with Extension here, we are a recipient, we're a spoke in the wheel of an SBA Community Navigator grant. And so we have a new staff member who we've hired, who is actually working on Southwest Arkansas, to which Hempstead County is one of the counties there where the work will take place. It's very much a focus on one-on-one support of entrepreneurial small business. So we're looking to connect the dots between the work that's going on there, not only with the Community Navigator program, but also with this Forward curriculum. And it's a very nice blend in terms of ways that we'll be able to uplift small business while at the same time with Forward uplifting the work of industry and other areas of workforce.
Thank you, Hunter. So the next piece that we're developing is a remote work piece. Since COVID, a lot of communities have developed some, and a lot of communities are getting additional resources to close the broadband gap. And so they're thinking about remote work as an opportunity that they might be able to explore. And many of you know that Paul Hill at Utah State has developed a remote work curriculum to help people become better remote workers. And so we're working with Paul to take a piece of that and fashion it towards the Forward program so that cooperative extension folks can help communities think about how to better support remote workers. What they might need to do in order to provide more opportunities and implement a remote work strategy. And then one of the last pieces is recruiting rural learners. And this is the piece that Jeff Sherman at Oregon State has been working on for us. And at this point, I think, Arkansas in Hempstead County, you've been talking with the high school folks. And so thinking about how you're going to get students interested in these career pathways eventually. And so one of the pieces of the Forward curriculum is sort of helping to support rural learners as they're stepping through these career pathways. So I don't know, Tabitha, did you want to comment a little bit on how you might see that playing out as the pilot moves forward?
Yes, so the high school, the school district, Dr. Jonathan Crossley is the superintendent there. He's fairly new to Hempstead County from what I understand, and very interested in the workforce development piece of education. And they have begun a program called Bobcat Works. And I've just confirmed with Terry to make sure I don't accidentally lie about this. They have 21 students who are currently placed with 18 different businesses in the area for internships. And I believe the majority of those are paid internships through the school. And these businesses have, signed a memo of understanding, that this relationship is beneficial for both the businesses, the industries, and I don't mean to imply that specifically manufacturing, though some of them are, but different industries throughout Hempstead County. And we're all hoping to see that grow as we move forward.
Thanks, Tabitha. So our next steps in this project is we'll continue to gather data from the pilot projects and use that information to assess the curriculum and make changes to the curriculum and suggestions to people who might be using it about how to adapt the curriculum for specific instances that they might find in their community. And that'll include tools such as facilitator agendas and PowerPoint slides and worksheets. A lot of these are tools that the pilot communities are developing and refining as they move along. And so we will make that available on NCRDC's Community Development Library. And we'll be asking, we're hoping that as people download the curriculum and the tools, that we'll be able to find out who they are so that we can follow up and figure out how they're using it and get some feedback from them about, refinements that they might find they've had to make in order to make them as useful as possible in their specific situation. Michael, did you want to comment on the Community Development Library and, the repository there?
Sure. So this curriculum will eventually live on the what we call the Community Development Extension Library, or CDEXT library. This was a online resource that was funded by the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development with funding from NIFA. It's in partnership with NACDEP, the National Association of Community Development Extension Professionals. It's online already. It's been online for just under a year, I would say. It's being curated by extension professionals from University of Iowa and from Purdue University at the moment, and some folks from NACDEP as well. And this curriculum will live on that website and be available to extension professionals across the United States. We haven't quite gotten down to the brass tacks in terms of how we're going to chunk it. There may be some videos there may be some other things, worksheets and so on, but it should be the entire curriculum that you'd be able to download and use. And those next steps are, how do we get people trained up if there needs to be training? How do we build a community of learners that can lean on one another if they are using the curriculum? And those are things that we're talking about right now. Sheila, if I may, I saw that there was a question in the chat about childcare. And we recognize that workforce development is one of those wicked problems, and there's a lot of different facets to it. And if you're following the data like we are, you see that those workforce participation rates that Tanya had put up there, if you take them and slice and dice them by gender, you see that women are disproportionately affected, especially women with children are disproportionately affected over the last couple of years in terms of workforce participation. A lot of that we know is rooted in the lack of childcare, especially in rural areas. And that's becoming a really binding constraint for a lot of women who have to make a choice between going to work and caring for their children. And so we recognize that at the NCR-CRD, and we're trying to inform that discussion. And so we have what's called NCR Stat, that the data, it is representative at the state level. We have data that's going to be available here this fall based on a massive survey that we're conducting right now across the North Central region. Childcare is a part of that survey. We're going to have a more targeted survey focused on childcare, adult care, and senior care. That survey is going to be going out in the winter time, and we'll have that data available in early 2023. And so, and we did fund a project actually here in Indiana as part of our small grants program that's focused on childcare. That's a very interesting project that's going on, and we're funding a faculty fellow that will be starting here soon. And their specific area of interest is rural childcare. The other thing I'll throw out there is not only is there a childcare issue, but there's also a healthcare related issue, health and wellness related issue in terms of workforce development. And so we're giving leadership to what's called NC 1100, and NC 1100 is a systems perspective to community resilience, rural healthcare at the intersection of households and businesses. And part of that is really focused on looking at that intersection between workforce development and health and wellness. And so we're inviting folks from land-grant universities across the United States to come join us in that work on the research and on extension side. And that's available through the NIMS website if you're familiar with that, if you have a Hatch grant. And if you're not or want to learn more information about the NC 1100, I'd be happy to add that as well.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that folks are starting to put questions and comments in the chat. Chuck asked us about engaging youth in job opportunity and career exploration. And I think Tabitha talked a little bit about how the pilot in Hempstead County is working with the local school system. And, they've got that Bobcat Works program. And hopefully that will help to give these students an opportunity to see different career options. What we're really trying to do there is prevent brain drain from rural communities. Tabitha, do you want to comment on that?
I can. Yes, I think getting students out into the workforce, starting their junior year, summer before their senior year, and, allowing them to see, exactly what there is in their community can inspire them to want to stay in their hometown. I know it very much did for me years ago, but not going to say how many years, but years. And I think it's a great place to start. And I would love to see even middle school and earlier be able to get out and see what's available to them in their hometowns, and hopefully we'll see that happen with this program.
And Sheila, if I could just add real quick, I think building on what Tabitha said, there's a real recognition amongst the partners, not just the school district, but I think the community as a whole, the stakeholders at the table have really recognized this issue. And there is a lot of energy around this brain drain question of how do we keep our youth in the county. And so of the goals that have been set through this program, which the stakeholders have set some robust goals, one of the very clear steps along the pathway of success for them is really how to retain their youth and how to engage them in the workforce. That has been a very clear driving factor in the work of this initiative around Forward in Hempstead County.
Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
In Crawford County, one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the employers was the disconnect with the local school system. And as I mentioned, the school was not part of the original group because there's a lot of transitions happening in the leadership level, but there's definitely a lot of interest moving forward in introducing some programs and to really bring the youth out into the businesses. Now, the number one challenge within the transportation, warehousing, and logistics sector is that typically you need to be at least 17 before you can be within the facilities. And so that is definitely a challenge that we're going to have to work through and figure out how to bring that real life experience into the classroom. And so one of the pieces that is kind of unique in Crawford County is that we do have a career and technical education facility that's within the region, but it's like an hour and a half away. So for example, I mean, typically if the youth wants to go and learn about welding, or they want to go learn about construction trades or any of those more technical occupations, they're going to get up at 5:15 in the morning to catch a bus. And as you know, with youth, that's not usually their cup of tea to wake up that early in the morning. And so the new superintendent coming in is very aware of that. And so we're looking forward to having some of those conversations to kind of close that loop, if you will, in terms of the engagement across the school system and as well as the other career opportunities within Crawford County.
And this is where the data can help inform the conversation as well. Tanya showed some data that we have from the MSI that comes from Burning Glass. And again, proprietary data, we pay a lot of money to have access to that data, and not everyone has access. But if you do, you saw the credentialing data that was associated with that, and what credentials are these job opportunities seeking, and how do you connect students to acquisitioning those credentials. And so that's a key piece of information, and part of the pathway is if they want these types of jobs and these types of jobs are available in their local area, how do they get the credentials needed in order to make that happen? And is there an opportunity for these firms to actually work together to build up a pipeline that they can both, or all three of them, draw from, rather than poaching from one another, which is going on right now in the local area? So trying to eliminate the barriers to entry and the barriers to getting these credentials is one of the things that we've been discussing and examining in Crawford County.
And one of the things that I've heard from some other folks that are working on rural workforce issues is the challenge that many business owners in the area may think that there are no local people that have the skills that they need in order to do things that they might outsource. Like IT, software development, some of those other things that they might just assume there's no one locally who can do that work, when, actually, if they did work on building that pipeline and with the opportunities that remote work and remote learning provide, I think that these opportunities have really opened up much more. And so really building that awareness and the information that these pilot programs and others that we hope will follow can bring to the table can really open up the conversation about, well, what are the things that we need that we're currently outsourcing, and how can we keep more of those jobs in our community so that we can train our kids to do that work. Other comments and questions?
We have a question here that says, based on result, which factors were more affected on youth to remain in rural area? Could you expand on that question so we can better answer?
Yeah, it looks like it was a question to Chuck, and Chuck provided a list of those variables based on the Nebraska study. There's been a robust amount of discussion in the chat about retaining our local youth or attracting youth from the outside. And yeah, it's definitely part of the problem, right? We have a demand problem, we have a supply problem, and part of the supply problem is our youth are leaving. And so looking at those at this in tandem with the workforce development issues are certainly part of it. Ron Wilson just asked tell us more about the remote work piece. And I'm not sure if Paul is on to be able to discuss that. Tanya, you've been through the program if Paul's not on.
Yeah. Paul, are you here? Okay, I'm guessing not. So the remote work is a curriculum from Utah, and essentially it's a 1 month long training that individuals can go through to learn how to be a remote worker. And so when we say remote worker, we're not only talking about working for someone else remotely, but also to be a freelancer or even an entrepreneur. And so that's a program that has been very successful. But within this curriculum, the angle that we are taking is not so much that curriculum itself, but how can communities be in a better place to provide opportunities for folks to be a remote worker. And so that's really the way that's the angle that we're taking. So because you may have heard of other communities where they're starting to offer incentives for people to move to the community to be a remote worker. And, you may think of a state like Utah, who's very remote, maybe thinking, how is that even feasible? But Carrie has shared with us, there's been some opportunities where communities are going after grants to provide essentially like a co-working space where those who are remote workers can have a solid broadband or internet service to be able to work remotely. So that's the angle that we are focusing on within this curriculum when it comes to remote work.
You mentioned grants, Tanya, and I do want to take a moment to recognize once again Ascendium and the support that we've gotten from Ascendium throughout this process. Kirsten's been awesome to work with. I just saw that she wrote in the chat regarding a report that she just read, rural innovation, on rural innovation, and just want to thank Ascendium again for all the support that we've gotten. And if you're interested in their work, I'd highly recommend going to their website and checking out all the cool projects that they've been funding all over the United States in workforce development and other areas.
Thanks. Other questions? We've got Hunter putting some resources in the chat with Be Pro, Be Proud, recruiting rural learners. And we'll take a look at that resource as well. Thank you. Thank you, Hunter. And, I'll start a conversation on LinkedIn about this project, and really looking forward to having other folks post other resources there as well. Any other questions right now while we've got everyone here? On the pilot projects, on the different pieces of the curriculum? How are communities clearing the bar of gathering local investments and workforce development from businesses? I'm not sure I understand the question fully. Sarah, Tanya, how are your businesses responding to these opportunities?
I think how you're asking is like, how are businesses committing, to be invested in workforce development? Is that how you're trying to ask the question, Sarah? What I'm seeing in Crawford County in particular is that the issue of workforce development has become like a resounding drum. Like that's all we're hearing is the local economic development director. That's all that he's hearing. And so the question is, well, how do I even tackle this when it's so complex? How do I even take a bite out of this humongous elephant? And so again, when it came to looking at the sectors, the economic development director was thinking about businesses that were probably more prone to be eager to be part of a solution when it comes to workforce development. And so that was how we approached it. And so we're still at that conversation piece to figure out exactly how much are they going to contribute. Like I mentioned, at the high school level, right now there's not a lot of programs, but there's been interest in introducing JAG, which is Job for America Graduates. That's one program, but it's very expensive to bring into a school. So that is one that we're currently exploring. We have a neighboring county that has been very successful in having a local high school have like a mini manufacturing facility, if you will. And so they're looking at bringing that into the local high school. So again, that would require commitment from the businesses to see that happen. So we're not quite there yet in terms of the conversation. We're still gathering information in terms of what training do they need. And once we can cobble all those together, then we can have a much better understanding of what the commitments will need to be from agencies, businesses, the county, or where that money is going to come from.
Tanya, if I may add, part of what we've been doing is taking somewhat of a sectorial orientation where we're looking at pathways to work within a particular sector. And when you're thinking about a rural area, it may be that within that sector, these firms are competitors, right? They may actually be competing against one another. They may be competing for the same workforce. And so the days of poaching people from one business to bring over to the other, it's not a tenable solution. It's not a sustainable solution. And so as we think about trying to bring these businesses on board to collaborate in some way, shape, or form to assist the entire community or county or region, if you will, we need to think about their talent, their time, and their treasure, and which of these or maybe all of them can they invest in order to support this. And so I know Tanya's had some really interesting conversations with some of the local businesses in terms of their time and talent, their expertise, and how might they help us create some of these pathways to some of the credentialing that needs to occur, and where are the pinch points, and how might the businesses work together in order to alleviate those pinch points. And it may be an investment of treasure, if you will, or money that might alleviate some of those pinch points. In other cases, it might be actually bringing in some outside educational resources or creating some other pathways to some other resources that don't currently exist in the community, but these businesses may be connected to those outside of the community. And so it's really going to vary. But I think as we think of the talent, time, and treasure paradigm from philanthropy, I think it works equivalently well here as we try to interface with our businesses and educational sector to try to move the needle on workforce development.
Yeah, and Michael, like the fact of the matter is that if you look at a long-term trend of investment in training and workforce development, it really trended downward as far as private sector investment. And I think other economists on the call can probably verify this. And I think that what they're seeing now is that they really do need to make that investment. And I think the original question is really about return on investment. At what point does an employer see a return on his investment? And I think that when people are concerned that if they train someone, they're just going to be poached away to somewhere else, that makes people hesitate about whether or not they really want to invest. But if you're investing as a community, and you're making some joint investments in the development of the skill level of the whole community, then I think it's easier for people to see where that return is going to come. All right. Well, we've had a nice conversation. We've got one last question that we can take about 4-H. And their role in engaging youth in workforce development and entrepreneurship. And so I don't know if any of our pilot folks, want to speak to that. I know Carrie's been working with youth in health, and a number of other folks on the call and in the pilot projects are familiar with youth development initiatives. Does anybody want to comment before we let everyone go?
Maybe I'll begin the answer by just saying that Tanya's family is banned from participating in 4-H because they win every single ribbon in the entire county. And so then the challenge becomes, how do you take that talent that she's fostering through participating in 4-H and all of those projects, and how do you translate that for the students, that real life experience? How do you translate that for them to something that perhaps could be a good or service that could be sold, or some sort of entrepreneurial opportunity? It could even be social entrepreneurship, if you will. I know on the FFA side, which Tanya and I are both steeped in, she was a state officer and I was an FFA advisor, we have supervised ag experiences. And oftentimes those supervised ag experiences turn into entrepreneurial enterprises, but that's intentional. That's the whole idea of the supervised ag experience. Much of the time is to provide you the space to fail or provide you the space to succeed so you can learn from your mistakes and celebrate your successes. And I think there's opportunities to do that in 4-H as well. Perhaps it's in robotics or perhaps some of the other wonderful STEM related programming that they do, but it's going to take that intentionality of trying to potentially commercialize that or leverage that initial educational experience to take it to the next level in terms of trying to sell it, if you will.
And I would just say, we haven't delved, it's a great idea, and I appreciate the person who raised that point. We actually have had another extension agent in our state ask us that very question of how 4-H can be involved, particularly around entrepreneurial workforce pathways. And so thank you for that. It's a great idea to lift up.
Oh, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Sheila.
I was just going to turn it over to you, Maria.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And this was a great webinar, great way to end kind of the semester webinars. And we'll start back up our webinars in August. And I look forward to seeing a lot of you there. So thank you and have a great week.